Coheed Cambria's new album, The Color Before the Sun, is a step outside of their comfort zone in two different ways. First, it's their first non-concept album, departing from the Amory Wars saga. Secondly, this is essentially a soft rock album, which if you've listened to Coheed for a long time, you'll know that even when they had poppy elements in their songs, they always had a sense of prog rock mixed into it all. Them departing from the Amory Wars would be enough to frustrate some fans, but then them completely departing from their prog roots, it's a huge risk that you have to respect, even if you don't care for the album. Luckily, the album isn't a disaster in the slightest. Is it great? No. Is it even in their top 4 best albums? Probably not. But there's so many great things on this album that have never been done before, which I always appreciate as a listener. It's certainly the moodiest album they've ever released, with Claudio and Travis both evolving as guitar players, incorporating ambient-sounding licks, especially on the softer songs. A good example of this is the song Colors, which I find Coheed to be the most successful with their new moody approach to songwriting. It starts with subtle effect-riddled guitars while Zach Cooper's fantastic bass steps in and basically takes control of the song. It's a great blend of quiet sounds and explosive melodies, leading to a beautiful piano outro. Oh yeah, forgot to mention that Zach Cooper is probably the MVP of this album. When there's a song that maybe doesn't work as well as the other songs, the bass is always stellar and addictive. For instance, in a song like Here to Mars, which is a song that doesn't really appeal to me that much, the bass lines make me want to listen to it instead of just skipping it every time. But since we're talking about the things that doesn't really appeal to me on this album, there are a few. Here to Mars, for instance, is a song that doesn't really touch me in this specific part of my life, but I could totally see someone reaching an emotional peak during this track. As well as Atlas, which will probably be a fan favorite very quickly. The song is obviously well done and beautifully performed by the band, but the song just doesn't really resonate with me. There's just so many times on this album where the chord progressions and the choruses feel a bit uninspired and lazy. But it's because they try to go with grand choruses, which is wildly appealing, but it just doesn't really do anything for me. Since we're on the negatives, I'll discuss my least favorite track on the album, which is The Audience. I've already talked about just how soft and easy listening this album is, then this busy song steps in and it feels completely out of place. It honestly takes me out of the album right before the very end of the album, which is a shame. It would be different if it had catchy melodies and harmonies to go along with the heavier nature of it, but it just kind of feels messy and unnecessary considering that it clocks in at 6 minutes and 11 seconds. Now that I'm done trashing this album, let's get back to the huge positives of the album. Eraser comes in immediately after the poppy yet hard-hitting opener Island, and it feels like Coheed of old. With that being said, this album sounds nothing like Second Stage, In Keeping Secrets, or Good Apollo, so if you're looking for that, sorry, maybe next time. But when I say Eraser feels like Coheed of old, I mean the guitars are heavy, but there's consistent poppiness, either in Claudio's vocals, Zach's bass lines, or Josh's subtle yet effective drums. Young Love sort of feels like the Afterman 2.0, and I mean that in the best possible way. While the song never explodes or becomes vintage Coheed, the mix of Claudio's distortion and Travis's clean guitars makes for a soothing and beautiful listen. Some may even find this song boring, but it's one of the few times on the album where their experimentation absolutely works for me. From there on, we're hit with the previously released You've Got Spirit Kid, which honestly even works better within the context of the album. I just really find this to be a nearly perfect pop rock song. It has catchy power chord progressions and harmonies from hell that get stuck in your head once the chorus hits. The stellar production on the album really shows here, with Josh's drums feeling authentic, yet not too raw to take you out of the mood. Surprisingly, there are 2 acoustic tracks on this album, Ghost and Peace to the Mountain. They both work, but for different reasons. Ghost is a very subtle track, only featuring Claudio and Travis. It's probably the most somber track on the album, but it's effective mainly because of its short runtime. Peace to the Mountain is the final track on the album, and while it's roughly 6 minutes, it still never breaks into vintage Coheed. But this is not a bad thing. This is quite possibly the most easy listening and most approachable song on the album, ending with gang vocals being sung over top of violins and trumpets. I am a bit sad that this album isn't very progressive, but sometimes bands want to try something different, and while not everything works here, it's still a solid Coheed album. With all that being said, there's really no songs here that I immediately love and feel the need to put on repeat, which makes the overall album repeat value a bit weak. But you've got to respect the solid things about this album, because while they're certainly different, it's done beautifully and with poise. I give The Color Before the Sun 3.5 out of 5. Thanks for listening.